In this episode, Tom and Megan take up Picard Season 3, Episode 5.
So I found this an incredibly powerful episode. Megan, where do you want to start?
Oh gosh, there are so many options for where we could start, but let's talk about maybe one of the big ones, and let's make that the what was going on with the big reveal about Starfleet and the interplay, the relationship between Ro and Picard.
Okay, so these were some of my favorite TNG episodes, and I can still remember watching the final episode where she was on TNG and she defected to the Marquis. And I thought a lot about that because on that episode, she was so conflicted. She was a Starfleet officer, she was a tactical officer, and she'd been asked to infiltrate the Marquis, who was defending Bajorans. And it was, I thought, one, incredibly powerful. Two, the ending, sort of the last scene with her. I think it was Riker she said this to, but I know it wasn't Picard. But she said, "Tell Captain Picard I'm sorry." Mm. And it was as heartfelt a line as I recall in TNG, but I was a little irritated because she should have told him herself. And what I fully didn't appreciate about my thoughts then until I saw this episode was the relationship they had. And Picard made clear in this current evolution or current episode we're talking about, they had a very deep relationship.
Yeah.
But back in TNG, when she defected, it was absolutely clear to me she had to do that. She could not do anything against her people, the Bajorans. Her father had been tortured to death by the Cardassians, and
in front of her.
Yes, and in front of her. And if he didn't embody everything that was good about Bajor, he certainly embodied everything that was bad about the Cardassians. And at that point, they were some pretty bad actors. Dialogue that they had in 10 Forward, I thought, was just masterful. Kudos to the scriptwriters and showrunners for deciding to give us that full story. But equally to how Picard felt about her, she felt that way about him. And I guess what I wanted to explore with you a little bit was, I don't think this was some kind of love, but I'm not sure how to characterize it. It wasn't a physical love. It wasn't an emotional love between partners. It was something different. And I don't want to say mentor-mentee because I don't even think that comes close to the relationship. I'm not sure Picard saw in her something in himself. I'm not sure Picard saw in her literally the whole Bajoran people. At one point, I thought that. I'm not sure why he stood up for her when no one else would, particularly Riker seriously disliked her in TNG. And so how would you assess their relationship?
Well, first thing I wrote down about it is, Ro is to Picard as Peter is to Tony. It's and I got kind of at the top. Okay, so the overarching theme here is the parenthood of Picard, and I think Ro is his first kid. And that was the cause of all of this. And as you pointed out, there is a love there, and you can't hurt someone that much if there isn't love there. That's not possible. And something that made that really poignant for me was when they were talking about the pain that we're feeling confirms that we're not changelings. That wouldn't be happening if that were happening. So I think it's a parental or a familial type of love that they were experiencing. Yeah, that was my take on it.
So do you think the little bit of story we got from her in this episode about her reasons really rang true for you? Absolutely.
I think if she had said goodbye in person, she wouldn't have gone. And I think she knew it. And so let me tell you a story. When I was younger, and I soon after I'd moved out and I was living in Montreal, my parents were in Ottawa. And every time my dad would drive me to the bus station, so I would get on the bus back to Montreal, he would stand there looking sadly out the window until the bus pulled away. And it killed me every time. I had to get my mom to ask him to stop. But you don't want to cause that hurt to someone you care about so deeply. So I think that she wouldn't have been able to do it if she had to look him in the eyes. But it was so important she had to do it.
See, I thought it was inevitable she was always going to go back to advocating, defending, or fighting for Bajor and the Bajorans. And I thought the minute they asked her to go undercover into the Marquis that this was where this was going. So that part I thought was really a mistake on either his or Starfleet's part, that they really didn't understand what a patriot she was. But it was absolutely fabulous. The reveal was great. The confrontation in 10 Forward, I thought was masterful. The way they are using 10 Forward in this series has been fabulous. She looked great. The whole earring or earpiece. If anyone didn't see TNG or even DS9, you really have no appreciation of what that means in the Bajoran culture. It's beyond religion. It's like a part of them, their earpiece. And for her not to be wearing it, I knew something was up. I didn't foresee where that was going.
What I loved about the data chip being in the earpiece, it was, and we're recording this on May the 4th, everyone who's watching this in the future, it was the Death Star plans are in RTD2. The plans have been passed along at great expense and great personal cost to try and save the universe. I loved it.
Nicely done. I'm only pissed off I didn't think of that. Then how about when she gets back into the shuttle, her crew, the changelings, beam back to the Titan, arm the bomb? Did it make logical sense that was how she would die, given how she had lived?
I feel like she knew her days were really numbered. Like, she wouldn't have left the data, I think, if she thought she'd be able to continue the work. I don't know if she expected to go so fast, but I love that she disabled the ship on her way out. Yeah, if you have to go. And then just calling it back to her TNG appearances, I'm giving you this fighting chance with the implicit, don't screw it up. There's no better way to make Picard do something. So I think she did it well.
Yeah. But there was a lot going on here. This was when we really get the reveal about the changelings and how they have adapted and they have evolved. And
Starfleet is compromised at the highest levels. What a great sentence. What a great word, like phrase. Oh, that was very exciting.
I found the scene in sickbay with Dr. Crusher where they actually do an autopsy on the dead changeling and discover for the first time what has been going on, and then figure out that the blood test won't work. But I think it was in this episode we discovered how Starfleet won the Dominion War.
Yeah, and having the being able to identify who was a changeling with the testing? No.
With the virus that was introduced. Yeah. And that still bothers me. And don't want to pick on your country because we certainly did it here, but it really reminded me of when the Indian children were taken to the seminaries. And it's
call it what it is. It's a genocide.
Genocide. And but here we had Starfleet doing it, and basically the only way they saw to win the war was genocide. And instead of being the best of us, we were the worst of us. And I was even irritated when, I guess it's the next episode where it must be the next episode where Worf says, well, we sent them the cure. And I just pissed him off or something. Yes. No, you don't introduce genocide and send the cure along. You don't introduce genocide to start with.
It seems like, because as we've been exploring more, and we should do more Star Trek episodes because these are really fun, but it's the more I've found that I'm digging into it, the more suspect Starfleet is in all instances. It's been fascinating to have this second really deep look at it. And I think maybe I'm not so shocked that was the choice that was made. Governments have done that, as you correctly pointed out.
You're our resident expert on all things the Defiant Janeway 7 of 9. And I don't remember the Dominion in that series. Obviously, they were in DS9, Odo, primary character, and that's where the war really played itself out. In DS9, the war was, as we would say, but a near thing. That literally was every people, the Klingons, the Romulans, the Cardassians, everyone lined up against the Dominion, and that's the only way to stave them off. And then, of course, introduce the genocide, and because of the nature of their connectedness, literally destroyed. an entire race of beings. Is that what we did to the Borg as well?
I think a little bit.
A little bit, a little genocide.
A little catastrophe, a little Armageddon.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, and it's so interesting because that is the response to the existential threat. The only way out or the easiest way out? I don't know.
Yeah. So there are two TOS references I absolutely have to talk about.
Okay.
And one we've talked about previously, and that's Daystrom Station, because that comes from TOS episode called The Ultimate Computer, when the inventor and builder of the computer is Dr. Richard Daystrom. And he was a very, I don't want to say troubled young man, because in the TOS episode, he was no longer young, but he was a child or a young man prodigy. And then he tried to create the ultimate computer, which failed. And I suppose in the era of ChatGPT and Skynet becoming self-aware, it's all things we have to talk about. But there's one other.
And we welcome our new robot overlords. The record.
But there's one other reference that I have to talk about, and that's the Idic medal. Now, the Idic medal comes from an episode called Is There in Truth No Beauty? A TOS episode. And in that episode, Diana Muldaur, who later is Dr. Pulaski, makes her first appearance as a different character. And she is communicating with a being who is ugly, that the sight of this being will drive humans insane. It turns out she's blind. And so that's why she can communicate. And she'd studied for many years on Vulcan so she could mind meld. Not as well as a Vulcan, but she had extrasensory perception abilities because of her lack of sight and being trained on Vulcan. And in a dinner to honor herself and the ambassador of this race of people, who's in a container so they're not seen, Spock wears something called the Idic medal. Mm-hmm. And the Idic medal comes from the Vulcan Science Academy, which awarded Spock a medal. And there's a large argument at the dinner party because the Diana Muldaur character thinks he is mocking her. And he says, no, I wasn't. Indeed, I did it to honor you. But there's another story to the Idic medal, which brings it right back down to present day, which was, it was the first time that sort of item had been specifically called out in a Star Trek episode. The next week, Gene Roddenberry had Idic medals for sale. And he was excoriated for product placement of his own product in the episode. And so he ended up having to pull them. Now, of course, they're incredibly valuable because there was such a limited run of Idic medals. But the entire, kind of, you leave that part out and go to the other one. I don't. But the Spock wearing the Idic medal in that episode was really something we hadn't seen. But it called out those two episodes, one with Daystrom and the Ultimate Computer, but here with a set of beings, not that we were in conflict with yet, was so different than us that it drove people insane. And that was part of the episode. Somebody uncovers the ambassador and they go insane, and Enterprise has to escape that insanity. I had to talk about that. What did you think of Jack in this episode?
Okay, I was going to ask you, this is because he's our other troubled young man that we can talk about. So I was thinking about at the beginning of the episode, I still thought he was perhaps some kind of human Borg type hybrid, because that horrible dream, the tentacles that he saw appearing on people's faces on his own hands, I really thought it was interesting. But then at the end of the dream, there was a voice that said, "Come home." Did that sound like Vedic to you?
That's what I thought at the time. At this point in this episode, I thought that there was some mental instability that had been caused by an alien being. And maybe that turns out to be it, maybe not, but there's something, I don't want to be so trite to say there's a voice inside his head, because there was a voice inside his head. But it's the first time I think he recognized something was wrong. And at the end of the episode, he clearly understands that. And the scene where he kills the 4 changelings.
Yeah, hello, River Tam moment. That was awesome.
And there were 2 parts to that, though. The part 1 was what you just said, which was he killed 4 changelings and summarily executed them. But when Dr. Crusher asked him, how did you know? He can't answer it.
Good point. I hadn't picked up on that. That's a really good point.
He doesn't even know why he knew they were so dangerous. And that, for me, was like, oh, okay. We're going in a certain direction. Now,
all right.
if he can recognize that on an unconscious level, when the rest of humanity or human beings or Terrans or Earthers, whatever we are called, can't, then there is something inside his head that's different from the rest of us. Any other? So what other thoughts might you have?
I think we should, maybe if we can touch a little bit on the Worf and Raffi subplot. Would I watch that buddy cop spinoff? Yes, I would. But they're delightful. And so they find the partner or the emotional brother of Sneed to get information that they're then going to pass along to her handler that we found out was Ro. They had to fake fight to the death. The Worf death fake out scene, it had me for a minute. I thought that was going to be the end of Worf. And then the reveal that Ro had been their handler and the reconnection of more old friends getting together. I liked pretty much all of it. What about you?
Absolutely. It was extraordinarily cool in that part. That whole dynamic was a lot of fun. And
Great.
yeah, it really was. And that's interesting. I really hadn't focused on the Worf-Raffi dynamic because I'm still thinking about Raffi and Seven and what's going to happen when we put all of them together. So I really hadn't focused.
They're lesbians. They're just going to talk about it for hours and hours. Hummus will be involved.
Will there be tears?
Probably not.
Probably not. And then
they'll end up really good friends.
Okay. There's a great line. We'll have to talk about it in the next episode that Worf lays on them that I just loved.
That was great.
Yeah. And that really brought home a whole nother story about dating dynamics that we probably can't get into. But yeah, that, and then at the end when they communicate with Picard, and it turns out Ro is their handler, and then at that point it all made sense in a way that we hadn't yet. We are on the cusp of just an incredible series of episodes.
We are. And just a final thing before we get to the end of this one, and we'll pick it up in the next episode because it delves into it a lot more. But I had down here, I think this was the first time that a main character, and I didn't write down which one it was, mentioned that the entire fleet, all of Starfleet, was going to be in one place for the Founders Day parade, and maybe just positing that was perhaps not the best idea of all time.
I think that was Ro.
I think
it
was
because
Ro.
She said she had been locked out of the preparations.
That's right. Yeah, and so I was like, finally someone is talking about this plainly terrible idea. It has a little bit Pearl Harbor-y. It's a historical fool me once type of thing on it. Anyway.
I saw Frontier Day is particularly, in the old days of the Soviet Union on May Day, May 1, they would have all the armed forces parade in front of Red Square. So I just assumed it was like a May Day parade. But you think it's something different?
I think it's something that you can only do if you feel supremely confident with your position in the world, right? And it's not the only time in history that will have been proven to be an unwise idea. There's some precedent here that you'd think military analysts might have considered. After the recent terrorist attacks that happened on the planet, maybe don't put the whole fleet in one place at the same time.
That's a good point. Okay, great way for this episode to end. This series just is
so good.
So good. And I'm just going to, I was just going to say one more time, if you haven't seen this episode, go back and rewatch it just for Ro and Picard. If you're any kind of Star Trek fan, it's worth it just for that scene in 10 Forward.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And can't wait to talk about the next one.
So you said you had something else?
Oh, this was just a comment on the meta of the universe. I thought it was really interesting seeing these. I apologize. This is more appropriate for the next episode. I will leave you on that cliffhanger.
Well done.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today.
This is Tom Fox again. If you have enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll subscribe, rate, and review it wherever great podcasts are listened to. Because That's What Heroes Do is now the award-winning Because That's What Heroes Do, and it is a special production of the Compliance Podcast Network.